What would you do if the person you trusted most suddenly became the reason for your worst nightmare? It begins with a single phone call, a frantic voice, a husband gasping into the receiver, begging for help. His words are broken, his tone panicked, and his fear sounds real. He says he's found his wife in the bathtub, unresponsive, still, lifeless. Dispatchers send emergency units racing to the home. Paramedics rush inside, expecting a tragic accident. Maybe a slip, maybe a drowning. A horrible but simple explanation, but what they find is far more disturbing. The body in the water tells a different story. The bruises don't match his words. The position of the victim raises questions. And the longer first responders remain in that bathroom, the more their unease grows. Something about this scene feels wrong. Very wrong. The husband insists he had nothing to do with it. He says he just found her that way, that he did everything he could to revive her. But investigators are trained to spot inconsistencies. And before long, the details in his story begin to crumble. Neighbors describe a troubled marriage. Friends recall arguments that seem to grow darker over time. Family members reveal a history of control, jealousy, and manipulation. Slowly, a picture forms, one that looks less like tragedy and more like betrayal. But here's the chilling part. Behind every 911 call lies a hidden truth. Sometimes the caller is desperate to save a life. Other times, the caller already knows the life is gone. So which one is this? The husband's 911 call was just the beginning, a spark that ignited a firestorm of suspicion. Detectives comb through every detail. The timeline, the evidence, his words, his tone. Even the pauses in his call become crucial. The bathtub, once filled with water, is now filled with questions. How did she really end up there? Why did certain marks on her body not match the story he told? And most importantly, was this an accident? Or something far more sinister? In cases like this, nothing is as it first appears. The scene you see isn't always the scene that happened. Behind closed doors, secrets build. Tension grows, and one final moment can tip everything over the edge. The husband wanted to sound like a grieving man, but was he hiding something darker? This case forces us to look closer at the people we think we know, to question what happens inside homes that look normal from the outside, and to wonder how quickly love can twist into something deadly. By the time investigators reach their conclusion, the horrifying discovery in that bathtub will shock everyone. The truth behind the husband's call is not just unsettling, it's terrifying. And the question that lingers long after the case is closed is this. When you hear a desperate 911 call, can you ever really trust the voice on the other end? Every story has two sides, the one everyone sees, and the one that hides in the shadows. On the surface, this couple looked ordinary. They lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind where kids ride bikes down the street and neighbors wave from across their lawns. Their home didn't stand out. It blended in. A two-story house with a trimmed yard, a car in the driveway, and lights glowing softly at night. To outsiders, nothing seemed unusual. The wife, the victim in this story, was well-liked. She had a warm smile, the kind of presence that drew people in. Friends described her as compassionate, someone who listened more than she spoke. She worked hard, cared deeply for her family, and often went out of her way to help others. She was the type of person people trusted with their secrets because she never judged. But behind that kindness, there were signs of strain. Her closest friends noticed changes, subtle at first, missed calls, canceled plans, excuses that didn't quite make sense. She seemed distracted, worried, as if carrying a burden she couldn't put into words. Her husband, meanwhile, painted a different picture. To those who didn't know them well, he appeared attentive. He held her hand in public. He told stories about how much he loved her, but those who saw them up close noticed cracks in the image. His affection sometimes felt forced. His temper, when it slipped through, was sharp. He was the kind of man who wanted things his way and who grew restless when they weren't. Neighbors later said they sometimes heard shouting through the walls, arguments that lasted late into the night. At first, people dismissed it. Every couple fights. But as the years passed, the tone of those arguments seemed to darken. What began as disagreements escalated into something harsher, something heavier. Still, she stayed. Maybe out of love, maybe out of fear, or maybe because leaving felt impossible. That's the complicated truth about relationships like this. From the outside, it's easy to say someone should walk away. From the inside, it's never that simple. Family members noticed the distance too. The once cheerful woman they knew began to pull back. Holidays were quieter. Her laughter, once effortless, became rare. Some relatives tried to ask questions. She brushed them off, insisting everything was fine. But her eyes told a different story. In the months leading up to her death, that unease seemed to grow stronger. She confided in a friend that she felt trapped, that no matter what she did, it was never enough. She wanted peace, but peace never lasted. The tension in the house was always waiting, ready to ignite. And then came the night that changed everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. The couple was at home, like countless nights before. But within hours, everything unraveled. A woman who had once dreamed of a simple, happy life was found lifeless in her own bathtub. The husband's frantic 911 call suggested shock, panic, a desperate plea for help. But investigators would soon ask, was he truly shocked? Or was this the final act in a story that had been building for years? Because once detectives began digging into the background of this marriage, they discovered something chilling. This wasn't just about a sudden accident. It was about years of control, fear, and conflict bubbling beneath the surface, until it finally reached its breaking point. In the end, the woman who had spent her life caring for others couldn't protect herself from the danger inside her own home. And the man she trusted most would soon become the center of a criminal investigation that shocked the entire community. This is where the truth begins to surface. And it's darker than anyone imagined. Every crime leaves a trail, not always in fingerprints or DNA, but in patterns, behaviors, choices that point toward what's coming long before the final moment arrives. In this case, the signs were there. Small, easy to dismiss. The kind of things that friends and family notice but struggle to connect. But looking back, they read like a chilling warning. It started with control. The husband liked to know where his wife was at all times. At first, it seemed like simple concern. He called her often. He asked about her day. He insisted on walking her through her schedule. But over time, those check-ins began to feel less like care and more like surveillance. Friends recalled that she stopped making plans without him. She'd decline invitations, offering vague excuses. When she did meet up, her phone buzzed constantly. His texts, his calls, his questions. She brushed it off with a laugh, saying he just worried too much. But her smile never quite reached her eyes. Then came the jealousy. If she spoke to a coworker, he wanted to know why. If she stayed late at work, he demanded details. Even casual interactions seemed to trigger suspicion. She tried to reassure him. She tried to prove her loyalty. But nothing was enough. His doubts grew louder, sharper, harder to escape. Behind closed doors, arguments became routine. At first, they were about little things, money, chores, who forgot to lock the door. But those disputes escalated. His voice would rise. His anger would flare. And sometimes, neighbors said, the shouting was followed by an eerie silence, the kind that made people wonder what had just happened on the other side of those walls. Her closest confidants noticed her energy shifting. She seemed drained, withdrawn. The woman who once lit up every room now looked over her shoulder. She dressed carefully, spoke cautiously, and weighed every word as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. There were also physical signs. Subtle injuries she couldn't quite explain. A bruise on her arm, a scratch near her collarbone. When asked, she dismissed them quickly. Just an accident. I'm clumsy. But those who cared about her weren't convinced. They saw fear in her explanations. Fear she couldn't mask. Still, she stayed. And many wondered why. Some said it was love. Others believed it was fear of what might happen if she left. Because men like him rarely let go easily. The need for control, once established, only grows. Even his friends began to notice changes. He grew more irritable, more possessive, less willing to laugh. He drank more. He snapped at minor inconveniences. And when she wasn't around, his words about her were sharp. Criticisms dressed as jokes, complaints disguised as frustration. The red flags were waving. Loud, visible, undeniable. But at the time, they blended into the rhythm of daily life. People convinced themselves it was normal. Just stress. Just marriage. Just the ups and downs every couple faces. Until one night, things went too far. A heated argument spilled into the early hours of the morning. She confided in a friend later that day, her voice trembling, that she didn't feel safe, that she was starting to think about leaving, that she couldn't keep living like this. Her friend urged her to get out, to take action before it was too late. But leaving is never easy. And in many cases, it's the most dangerous step of all. Looking back, investigators saw these signs as puzzle pieces. Each one revealed a darker side of the marriage. Each one pointed toward the tragedy that was coming. But at the time, they were brushed aside, misunderstood, minimized, because no one could imagine how far it would go. The bruises, the jealousy, the control, the arguments that ended in silence. They were all precursors, early glimpses of a storm gathering strength, waiting for the moment to strike, and when it finally did. The result was devastating, but this was only the beginning. The night began like many others, quiet, ordinary until it wasn't. They ate dinner, small talk, forced smiles. He complained about work. She tried to soften it. He wouldn't let it go. A sentence spun into an argument. A word became a shove. The temperature in the house changed. It dropped. Doors clicked. Drawers slammed. The tone sharpened. Voices rose. Short sentences. Sharp edges. Anger coated every word, he accused. She defended. He circled the blame like a shark. She asked for calm. He laughed it off. The laugh had no humor. It had teeth. The argument moved from the kitchen to the hallway. From the hallway to the bedroom. From the bedroom back to the kitchen. The walls swallowed their voices. Her hands trembled. She tried to leave the room. He blocked the way. He used his size. He used his voice. Control narrowed around her like a noose. Her breath hitched. She said his name. He said nothing she liked. Neighbors later remembered the pounding. Knuckles on plaster. A chair scraping the floor. A muffled cry. One neighbor thought it was the TV. Another assumed it was stress. A third wrote it off as a couple fighting. No one called the police that night. Inside, the argument became a list of ultimatums. Stay, leave, be quiet. Be compliant. The cadence of coercion. He demanded apologies he never earned. He cataloged her mistakes. He told her what she owed him. Each accusation landed like weight. She begged. For time, for space, for peace. He said the words that make people shrink. You made me do this. She backed up. There was nowhere left to go. He grabbed at her phone to stop her from calling. He shoved. She stumbled. A lamp toppled. A glass shattered. The noise was raw. The sound of something irretrievably breaking. Her friend called later that evening. She didn't answer. The unanswered call was a warning, a small red flag. Minutes stretched. The silence grew louder. He pushed her into the bathroom. He said it would be better there. She asked why. He said nothing. He murmured about control and betrayal. The bathroom door closed. The click of the latch sealed the moment. Inside the small room, words turned into hands. Hands into force. She tried to steady herself. He shoved, he pinned. She fought back with whatever she had, reason, pleading, a final flaring of dignity. He responded with pressure. A shove here, a hold there. The scene narrowed until all that remained was one struggle and two wills. Her legs weakened. Her voice faltered. She stopped making sense. The air felt thin. Panic sharpened into a simple animal instinct. Survive. She reached for the faucet. He grabbed her wrist. They wrestled near the tub. The small bathroom offered no escape. The struggle was frantic and brief. Quick strikes, a desperate shove. Objects clanged. Towels fell. Her head hit porcelain once. She gasped. He pressed harder. His breathing turned ragged. His hands shook. Once calm had become chaos. Once love had become violence. He realized, only when he realized it, that the fight had gone too far. He stood over her and checked for signs of life. He called her name. The silence answered back. Panic rose. Not from regret, from fear. Fear that the moment had consequences he couldn't control. He moved swiftly after that. Not to call for help first, but to clean. Towels soaked up water. Clothes were rearranged. The room was staged to look like an accident. He dragged a blanket. He wiped a counter. He fumbled with the phone before dialing 911. His voice was cracked but practiced. He told the dispatcher he had found her. He said he tried to revive her. He used words he hoped would absolve him. Outside, sirens drew near. Neighbors stepped onto porches. They watched, confused. The man walked out with a look that tried to mirror shock. His face was pale. His hands trembled. On the surface, he was the image of a man shattered by loss. Inside, the bathroom held the truth. Small clues. A scuffed floor. A towel placed oddly. A wet footprint. A bruise that didn't fit the story. Items out of place. The scene whispered contradictions. Investigators would later map the moments. A timeline assembled from fragments. The argument, the push, the struggle, the fall, the silence, the attempt to clean, the call. Each piece connecting in a sequence that revealed escalation, an ordinary disagreement turned lethal by force and fury. One wrong choice. One moment when control turned to violence. One life ended because the tension finally snapped. The house returned to its uncanny quiet. The street went back to sleep. But the aftermath would not. The small town would never again look at that mailbox, that porch light, or that bathtub the same way. And for the man who called 911, the story was no longer his to control. The truth of that night was hidden in plain sight. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident. A wife discovered in her own bathtub, a husband frantic, insisting he had found her that way. The call to 911 painted him as a desperate man, a victim of sudden loss. But the evidence inside the house whispered a different story. Detectives entered the bathroom and immediately felt uneasy. Something about the scene didn't sit right. The water level in the tub was strange, too low for a drowning. Her hair was wet, but her clothes were partially dry. Towels lay scattered, yet none seemed used. It was as if someone had tried to create a picture of chaos, but not lived in it. Then there were the marks. Small bruises along her arms, a faint line across her neck. Injuries that didn't match the husband's account. He claimed she slipped, that she must have hit her head. But the pattern of injuries told another story, one of force, of struggle. The neighbors' memories added to the puzzle. Hours before the 911 call, they had heard raised voices. One recalled a loud crash. Another thought they heard crying. No one could say for certain what happened behind those walls. But together, their accounts sketched a chilling picture. The husband told investigators he found her lifeless and immediately tried to pull her out. Yet the scene suggested hesitation. The water wasn't fully drained. The rug near the tub was dry. And most damning of all, his clothes were untouched. Not a drop of water on him. How could a man claim to have lifted his soaked wife from a tub while standing in dry pants and a clean shirt? The details grew darker. On the bathroom counter, police found a broken bracelet, a piece of jewelry she had worn earlier that day. It was snapped clean in two, as though ripped off in a struggle. On the floor, hidden beneath a discarded towel, was her phone. Its screen was cracked. Had she tried to call for help? Had he stopped her? When investigators confronted him, his story shifted. First, he said he wasn't home. Then he admitted he was. He said he found her already unconscious. Then he claimed he tried CPR. Each version of events unraveled under scrutiny. Each contradiction deepened suspicion. But the most shocking revelation came from the medical examiner. The cause of death was not consistent with an accidental fall. The injuries showed signs of sustained force. Pressure applied where there shouldn't have been any, and most disturbing of all, the timing. The examiner determined she was already gone long before her husband made that frantic 911 call. So what had he been doing in those missing minutes? Or hours? Detectives believed they knew the answer. He had been staging, rearranging, crafting a scene that might pass as a domestic tragedy. But no amount of staging could erase the truth etched into her body or the inconsistencies in his words. The horror of this crime wasn't only in the act itself, it was in the betrayal. A woman lost her life not at the hands of a stranger, but of the man who had vowed to protect her. A home, meant to be a sanctuary, had turned into a crime scene, and the bathtub, an ordinary fixture of everyday life, had become the chilling centerpiece of a murder investigation. As the evidence mounted, investigators realized what they were dealing with. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't a tragic twist of fate. It was deliberate, calculated, the culmination of years of control, jealousy, and violence, ending in one final act of brutality. The husband's 911 call had been more than a plea for help. It was a performance, a desperate attempt to mask guilt with grief, to play the role of the devastated spouse, even as the truth seeped through the cracks. The community, once shocked by the sudden loss, was now horrified by the unfolding reality. The details emerging from the investigation revealed not just a crime, but a chilling betrayal that shattered every sense of safety. And as the story spread, one thought echoed in the minds of everyone who heard it. If this could happen behind closed doors in a quiet suburban home, what else could be hiding in plain sight? The sirens had faded. The flashing lights outside the home disappeared. But for investigators, the real work was just beginning. Detectives returned to the bathroom again and again, combing over every inch. They photographed the tub, the towels, the bruises on her arms. Each detail became a potential clue. And with every pass, one truth became harder to ignore. This scene didn't fit the story of a tragic accident. The first break came when they replayed the husband's 911 call. His tone was frantic, yes, but investigators noticed something off. There were no sounds of CPR in the background, no shuffling, no water splashing, just his voice, carefully describing what he wanted dispatchers to believe. One detective later admitted, it sounded less like panic and more like acting. When they pulled the phone records, the cracks deepened. The call to 911 didn't happen immediately after the time she was believed to have died. There was a gap, nearly an hour missing from his timeline. What had he been doing in that time? The suspicion was chilling. He hadn't been saving her. He'd been staging the scene. The autopsy left little room for doubt. The medical examiner ruled her death as homicide. The injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. There were signs of a struggle. Pressure marks, defensive bruises. Her lungs told the final truth. This was not an accident. It was force. It was deliberate. Detectives brought the husband in for questioning. At first he cried, he begged, he claimed innocence. But as they laid out the inconsistencies, his dry clothes, the broken bracelet, the timeline, his composure cracked. His story shifted with every new piece of evidence. The man who once sounded so sure now stammered, stumbled, and contradicted himself at every turn. Finally, when the weight of the evidence became impossible to deny, he was arrested. Charged with murder, the community reeled. Neighbors who once waved politely at the couple's house were now horrified. Friends who had dismissed the arguments as normal now realized they had been witnessing a slow build-up to something unthinkable. Her family, shattered, demanded justice. They sat in the front row of every hearing, determined not to let her story be silenced. The trial was a spectacle. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. They played the 911 call for the jury. They showed photos of the bathtub, the broken bracelet, the bruises. They revealed the missing time in his timeline. And they painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and control until it ended in murder. The defense tried to fight back. They argued it was an accident. They said stress made him panic, that's why his story changed. They insisted there was no clear proof of intent. But the jury wasn't convinced. The evidence was too strong. The inconsistencies too glaring. And then there was his demeanor. Even in the courtroom, his face showed no regret. No sorrow. At times, he appeared annoyed, as though the trial itself was an inconvenience. Jurors noticed. Reporters noticed. And most of all, the victim's family noticed. When the verdict came down, the courtroom was silent. Guilty. The word hung in the air like a final judgment. The husband, who once tried to play the grieving spouse, was now a convicted murderer. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, stripped of control, stripped of freedom. But for her family, there was no true relief. Justice, yes. Closure, no. A life had been stolen. A future cut short. And no sentence, no matter how long, could fill that void. For investigators, this case was a reminder that even the most ordinary homes can hide the darkest secrets. That every 911 call must be listened to carefully, not just for what's said, but for what's missing. And for the community, it was a wound that would take years to heal. A chilling story that began with a single phone call and ended with a shocking truth. Because in the end, the most haunting part wasn't just how she died. It was who she died with. The case of the bathtub tragedy is more than just a crime story. It is a haunting reminder of how quickly love can transform into control, and how control can twist into something deadly. On the surface, this seemed like a marriage like any other. Two people living under one roof, trying to navigate the stresses of life. But beneath that surface, tension built like a storm. Small red flags appeared. Friends noticed her pulling away. Neighbors heard arguments. Family sensed fear. And still, no one could have imagined the ending would be this horrific. The husband's 911 call painted him as a desperate man trying to save his wife. But behind the curtain, the truth was far darker. He wasn't a grieving husband. He was the cause of the tragedy. His words, his tears, his frantic pleas, none of them could hide the reality that investigators uncovered. He staged a scene. He spun a story. But the evidence told the truth. The shocking details of this case remind us that sometimes danger doesn't come from strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the person sleeping beside you, the one who promises to protect you, but instead becomes the reason you're no longer safe. In court, his guilt was undeniable. The jury didn't just hear the evidence, they felt it. They saw through his performance. They saw the broken bracelet, the bruises, the missing timeline, and the chilling lack of remorse. When the guilty verdict was read, justice was delivered. But justice doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't bring her back. Her story ends here, but the questions it raises linger. How many red flags go unnoticed every day? How many victims stay silent, believing things will change, only for the cycle to spiral further? And how many cries for help are disguised as something else? Hidden in excuses, brushed aside by fear, or lost in the noise of everyday life. This case forces us to think about the hidden dangers behind closed doors, the arguments we dismiss, the excuses we accept, the people who smile in public but suffer in silence when they go home, and it leaves us with a chilling truth. A single phone call can tell two different stories. One, the version the caller wants the world to believe. The other, the version only the evidence can prove. So here's the question I want to leave with you. When you hear a desperate 911 call, do you believe the panic in the voice? Or do you wonder what's being hidden between the words? It's a question that may never have one simple answer. But it's one worth thinking about, because behind every call there's a story. And not all stories end the way we expect. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you think about the hidden dangers people face, I encourage you to share your thoughts below. What stood out to you most about this case? Could anything have been done to prevent this tragedy? I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want to hear more true crime stories just like this one, cases that shock, disturb, and remind us of the darkest corners of human nature, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. That way you'll never miss a story. Because sometimes the most terrifying tales aren't found in movies or books. They're real. They happen in houses just like ours. And they begin with voices we think we can trust. The husband's 911 call was supposed to save a life. Instead, it revealed a chilling truth. And the echoes of that call will haunt everyone who heard it, forever.